This week on Christian World News, the sound of freedom. The surprise summer blockbuster is raking in the big bucks at the box office. We'll show you how an independent studio with an emphasis on faith is rocking Hollywood and share the secret behind their success. Plus, Al-Qaeda on the rise. Afghanistan is once again a haven for the terrorist group. And the country's tiny Christian community is facing deadly persecution. And 4 months after the Nashville school shooting, survivors share their stories and tell how they're working together to overcome this evil. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Christian World News. I'm George Thomas. The Sound of Freedom, the surprise summer hit film here in the United States, has passed $100 million at the box office, and it is still growing strong. The movie tells the story of former Homeland Security agent Tim Ballard and his efforts to rescue children from sex trafficking. Jim Caviezel stars in the film that opened earlier this month. The budget for the film was $14.5 million. The Sound of Freedom is the second film from an independent studio that's opened in the top 3 in the last few months. And here's the secret formula. Angel Studios lets audiences decide what film and TV projects get the green light. Ephraim Graham has this story.
God's children are not for sale.
Sound of Freedom is a July surprise that could be the summer shocker.
Isaac and I would go with him.
Why, Isaac? In April, his only son scored headlines, opening at number 3, with nearly $6 million in ticket sales, after being made for only $250,000.
Throw this down for a catch.
I don't have a quarrel with you, teacher.
And then there's The Chosen, the record-making crowd-funded series that Lionsgate picked up for worldwide distribution in May, after 3 successful seasons without Hollywood support. The engine behind these upsets isn't in New York or LA. It's 43 miles south of Salt Lake City, Provo, Utah. Population, about 120,000. A land of towering mountains and waterfalls, and home to Angel Studios, where brothers Jeffrey and Neil Harmon are disrupting the entertainment world, putting power in the hands of the people. But it's been an uphill climb.
When we last sat here some 5 years ago, you were faced with a lawsuit. Let's go back to that time. What was it like? What do you remember?
Well, at the time, I was terrified when I first saw the lawsuit and shocked that it was Disney. But I remember distinctly getting up in front of, how many people did we have at that time? Probably, I don't know how many. It was around 50 people on the team, 40 to 50. I remember standing up and saying to people, I'm not exactly sure how this is going to turn out, but I believe that the audience, we, and Hollywood would be better off for it.
Disney sued the Harmons VidAngel platform for copyright infringement because it gave home audiences the ability to filter out what they didn't want to see or hear in its films.
When we were in trial, the number 2 guy at Disney was there the entire week, and their half of the room was filled with suits of sophisticated lawyers and people watching, and our half of the room was a measly crowd. And then the families would come in and sit down and cheer for us, and then they'd have to leave, or children would come and
little
cheer
Orthodox Jewish families would come in and sit down and be like, "You can do it, you can do it."
And so it's like this sea of high billing hours against, you know, the margins of Hollywood society.
How and why did you survive?
We should have lost. We really should have, and. But we didn't, and we can't take credit for that. It was a mixture of families like those stepping up and putting up $10 million for us to fight the battle.
And as far as I'm aware, we're the only company that's ever survived, like a startup company that's ever survived a big lawsuit like this from Disney.
So how are things different today? How big is Angel Studios? How many projects do you have? What's all happening here now?
Leaving bankruptcy, we were at somewhere in the 30 range, maybe 38 people. Today, we're at over 140. When Disney sued us, we did $8 million. Last year, we did 120.
We got a bunch of projects coming.
Let's look at the new project lineup for 2023. All right, Tempest. This is based on a sea monster. It's an animated series.
And a familiar formula is at work. A team of 100,000 Angel viewers screened hundreds of submissions, then voted to decide what Angel Studios produces and raises the money to fund. Like The Shift, starring Neil McDonough.
1,000 versions of you in 1,000 different worlds, all working for me.
Where's my wife?
I shifted her.
How did you know that giving the power to the audience would work?
It was intuitive. We grew up on farms in Idaho, and it was just intuitive.
In 2016, it wasn't intuitive to anybody else. It was just intuitive. We believed that if you give people ownership, Neil gives the example of owning versus renting in a home, you know. So we had this idea that we can raise money through the crowd, and because they own part of the network, they're way more conscious and want the network to work, and they're helping market us and defend us. And so we have 12,000 investors who invested in Angel Studios.
It was also intuitive just because when we were growing up, our parents would share with us films, but they were very select few that we could watch. And we have young children ourselves, and we just said, yeah, I mean, what we see being created isn't what we want to experience with our family. And so if we ask the families what they want made, we just felt like that would mirror more what we want to see made.
It's not the Hollywood model for movie making. It's the Harmon model, and it's working. Ephraim Graham, CBN News, Provo, Utah.
Yep, it's definitely working. Coming up, 2 years since the U.S. pullout from Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda is gaining strength. The country's small Christian community faces deadly danger. Welcome back. Al-Qaeda is gaining strength in Afghanistan. A new report from the UN says the group is training Islamic fighters for suicide missions. Afghanistan's tiny Christian population is more at risk than ever. Still, these believers are standing strong in the face of deadly persecution. Despite promises that Afghanistan would not become a haven again for terrorists, the 27-page UN report says groups like Al-Qaeda have greater freedom for maneuver under the Taliban than before, and that the threat of terrorism is rising in both Afghanistan and the region.
The Taliban has been cooperating with Al-Qaeda, has been supporting and sheltering Al-Qaeda. It did it during the U.S. presence in Afghanistan, and it continues to this day.
2 years after the U.S. withdrawal, Al-Qaeda-linked officials are reportedly now helping the Taliban lead in 3 provincial governments and have 5 new terror training camps around the country, including one in Nuristan.
The camp in Nuristan, United Nations notes that Al-Qaeda is training terrorists to conduct suicide operations.
Al-Qaeda has also opened safe houses in Kabul and 3 other provinces.
All of the locations that the UN notes where Al-Qaeda is running training camps, safe houses, and media operations centers, I've tracked over the last decade and a half Al-Qaeda having a presence there. Senior Al-Qaeda leaders and operatives and low-level fighters have been killed in all of these provinces.
Meanwhile, the UN says the ISIS threat is also growing, leaving many Afghans, especially those who are non-Muslim, uncertain about their personal safety.
Afghan Christians are literally moving from house to house. They've switched off their phones.
Dr. Martin Parsons has worked in Afghanistan for years and says even though life for Christians is dangerous right now, it will only get worse as Al-Qaeda's strength and footprint grows.
The Taliban follow a code of Islam called the Hanafi Code, which basically says any adult male who is deemed to be a convert who have left Islam gets 3 days to repent and then is executed. But under Al-Qaeda, it's simply execution on the spot for Christians.
No one knows for sure, but Parsons estimates that there are between 5,000 and 20,000 Afghan Christians in the country.
Gospel is not going to be stopped by Al-Qaeda, Taliban, or ISIS.
Former Muslim and native Afghan Hussein Andarias hosts a Christian television program that's seen inside the country. He's in regular contact with secret believers who tell him they are undeterred by the growing threats.
Yesterday, I spoke with one man from Badakhshan. He says, no matter what, I will follow Jesus, even if I have to be killed, even if my entire fellowship here, he's a church pastor. We will go on trusting the Lord Jesus Christ. They are very strong.
A recent State Department report blamed both the Trump and Biden administrations for not adequately planning for the withdrawal and failed to anticipate the collapse of the Afghan government. The Christians in Afghanistan obviously covered the prayers of the global church. Here in the United States, lawmakers are taking a serious look at rising attacks on religious freedom abroad, ranging from India to Vietnam to South America. CBN Washington reporter Hillary Powell brings us that story.
House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee leaders say they're more concerned than ever about the stake of religious freedom across the globe. Half of the world's population are not able to practice their faith freely. It's why they're calling out 2 countries where they say America needs to apply more pressure to adhere to human rights. The world's largest democracy, India, called out for its increasing religious nationalism.
Government actions, including the passage and enforcement of discriminatory policies such as hijab bans, anti-conversion laws, and anti-cow slaughter laws, have created a culture of impunity for threats and violence by vigilante groups, especially against Muslims and Christians.
Testifying about these conditions, the bipartisan U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, Rabbi Abraham Cooper declaring the State Department is not on the same page when it comes to Nigeria and India.
Sadly, Nigeria has become a country steeped in religious freedom violations where people of faith and those of no faith at all increasingly live in fear of harassment, imprisonment, and violence.
In a joint press conference last month, President Joe Biden gave India's prime minister a chance to defend democracy, saying there's no place for religious discrimination. Chairman Representative Chris Smith also singled out China, charging the Communist Party employs Bible burning, torture, and facial recognition to intimidate worshipers. On CBN's Faith Nation, Family Research Council President Tony Perkins says the U.S. should step up.
We had the Treasury Secretary, we had the Secretary of State in China. Were these issues discussed? We don't know that they were. They certainly were not on the record as being discussed, and I doubt that they were discussed.
Committee leaders urged the State Department to designate Nigeria, India, and Vietnam as countries of particular concern. Violations of the International Religious Freedom Act can make them subject to U.S. sanctions.
No diplomacy ought to get in the way of calling it for what it is. If a country is engaging in serious religious persecution, they need to be designated CPC.
Experts testifying say there's some hope in progress. USERF applauds the State Department's decry of 2 key countries for their worsening religious freedom conditions in 2022, Nicaragua and Vietnam. Hillary Powell, CBN News, Washington.
Thank you, Hillary. When we come back, a shooting at a Christian school rocked the city of Nashville, Tennessee. We'll hear the survivor stories and an amazing act of grace. Welcome back to Christian World News. Wailing sirens, anxious parents, and terrified children. That was the scene in Nashville, Tennessee last March when a gunman opened fire on a Christian school. 6 people, including 3 children, died in the attack. Amidst the ongoing grief and devastation, an incredible act of kindness has emerged. Charlene Aaron has the story from Nashville.
March 27th, a day that forever changed this Nashville community due to the deadly shooting at Covenant Presbyterian School. Residents here, many who are Christians, continue to rely on their faith for comfort and strength, a faith that offers hope and healing as they seek to move forward.
From scenes of chaos to ones of calm, life in Nashville appears to be back to normal, although it hasn't been easy.
We heard the sirens going by and knew something was up.
Nathan Parker serves as senior pastor at Woodmont Baptist Church, where parents waited anxiously to see their children that tragic day.
So we went outside, and there were already families in our parking lot running towards the door. Within, seconds, there were tons of police on site, and they said, "Where do we put these families, these parents?" And I said, "I think the sanctuary would be a good space."
Space that served as both a physical and spiritual refuge.
I think the prayers of our saints and the prayers of saints around the world who were lifting our church and these families to the Lord during that time provided a supernatural covering of peace, of calm. Families, there were some times of grief and some intense mourning, but for the most part, it was very peaceful and calm.
Aaron and Mary Joyce joined those waiting in the pews, not knowing if their daughter Monroe, a third grader at the school, was safe.
My faith was being challenged, and it was really hard. I mean, it almost felt like you're trapped in a nightmare.
Once reunited, it would be weeks before the 9-year-old would open up about how she hid from the shooter firing at fellow students.
She said, "Mommy, I was really still and really quiet. Everyone else was crying, and I was the only one not crying." And I still don't know how she wasn't seen. She saw the shooter, and she saw the gun sticking through their door, just going off. I still don't know what protected her that day, except for God.
This violence at a Christian school has shattered this community's illusions of safety.
At this point, it can happen anywhere.
While grateful to still hold their daughter, the Joyces say seeing the pain of friends who lost children in the shooting has been unbearable.
I can't imagine not being able to tuck in my child or squeeze my child. I would do anything to give that feeling back to my friends.
It is a pain shared by Anna Caudle. She had been a longtime friend of Catherine Kuntz, the head of Covenant School, one of the 6 killed that day.
And I kept thinking, okay, well, she must be talking to the police at this point, or she must still be in the building, or she must be making sure that the kids are getting on the buses.
Caudle recalls Kuntz as a selfless, devoted educator and a woman grounded in faith.
I've described her as a tree with roots that just reach down so far in her faith, and branches that provide shade and nurture and sustenance for everyone within her reach.
As the investigation continues into why former student Audrey Hale carried out the attack, her parents have turned over her so-called manifesto to the Covenant School families. Despite efforts to make the writings public, Covenant parents are fighting to keep them sealed, out of concern about possible copycat shootings. CBN News asked the Joyces about this push, but they declined to answer, citing legal reasons. Deborah Fisher of Tennessee's Coalition for Open Government says if a judge prevents the release, it would set a bad precedent.
The victims and the school and the church want the court to recognize new law, to create new law in Tennessee that would allow basically a victim's veto over releasing evidence in a crime, or churches or schools or anyone with a property right, their veto. And so we think that that is not the road to go.
In the meantime, many are turning to God for answers.
Church attendance throughout this area was boosted in those weeks after the shooting as people turned to the Lord for help, for not just answers, but for comfort, for encouragement, for healing.
Dr. Stephen Freeman of Grace Baptist Church in nearby Springfield also sees God moving in a special way.
We pray for even the opportunity through something like this tragedy happening, that we can point people to the Lord.
ministry has been extending to the shooter's family.
One of the things that stunned me to learn was that the Covenant families had pulled together and paid for the funeral of Audrey Hale, the shooter.
A clear example, one of the finest examples of Christian love that I think could ever be expressed.
I mean, it's absolutely necessary. It's the point. She was, not raised completely in that community, but she was a part of it for a minute. And unfortunately, through degrees at a time, got completely lost. And I don't think we allow that to sever her parents' need for love.
A love Parker says can heal the community and overcome any evil.
In this world, we will have tribulation, as Jesus told us, but we can take heart because he has overcome this world. He's overcome all the divisions, all the violence, the injustice, that our hope is in this new heaven, the new earth that he's coming to bring.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News, Nashville, Tennessee.
Finally this week, the faith-based film that sparked a surge in baptisms across this country is coming to Netflix. Jesus Revolution will be available to stream on July 31st, giving a new audience the opportunity to hear the gospel message. Pastor Greg Laurie, whose life the film is based on, talked to CBN about the impact the film is having, urging fellow believers to pray for those who watch it.
I see these things like what God has been doing through the Jesus Revolution film over in Asbury. Other things we're hearing about, like little drops of rain, and we're praying it'll be a downpour. But I think this is more than just a successful film, and I think Hollywood's paying attention. It's a story that's resonating with people.
You can watch more of that interview called Revival in America on CBN's YouTube channel. Folks, that is it for this week's edition of Christian World News. From all of us here from the headquarters of the Christian Broadcasting Network in Virginia Beach, Virginia, wish you a wonderful week ahead. Until next week, goodbye and God bless you.